The artificial gravity on orbital station ZT-9 had been calibrated to accommodate over 24 different species' optimal equilibrium. For Cadet Zoran, whose 3 legs splayed in a perfect tripod stance. It felt almost like home. A touch heavier, perhaps, but nothing his robust blue-skinned physiology couldn't handle. He lounged on his adaptive bunk, one spindly limb dangling off the edge, tapping an impatient rhythm against the metallic floor. Are we really expected to sit through another primitive warfare lecture? Zoran groaned, his voice resonating with the distinctive harmonic overtones of his species. Last cycle's footage of the Plaxians hurling explosive rocks at each other nearly put me in hibernation. Across the dormitory pod, Talia looked up from her neural tablet, all 4 of her amber eyes blinking in sequence, a sign of mild irritation among her kind. The historical analysis of pre-FTL warfare tactics is foundational to understanding modern conflict resolution, she said. The words practiced and precise. Her skin, a translucent alabaster that revealed the faint shadows of dual circulatory systems beneath, flushed slightly pink with conviction. Says the cadet who takes notes on the instructor's breathing patterns, called Vex from the corner, where the metallic scales covering their body caught the ambient light and fractured it into prismatic patterns across the walls. Their mouth curled into what passed for a smirk among the Sarkorians. We all know Earth is a backwater. Pulox just needs to fill curriculum hours before combat simulations. Zoran stretched his upper appendages, the joints clicking pleasantly. Exactly. Earth hasn't even broken their own atmospheric limits for sustained colonization. The Confederacy classifies them as early nuclear stage, right? Barely worth our tactical consideration. Talia's data capture tendril extended from behind her ear, a habitual gesture when she wanted to make a point. Actually, I reviewed the classification protocols last night. Earth is categorized as high caution, despite their technological limitations. This caught Zoran's attention. He shifted his weight, bringing all 3 legs beneath him as he sat upright. High caution. That designation is reserved for Class 3 threats and above. Precisely my point, Talia said, a hint of smugness in her tone. There must be tactical considerations beyond their technological development stage. Vex made a dismissive sound, a metallic rasp that scraped against the other's auditory receptors. Bureaucratic overcoding. Some administrator probably forgot to update their status after they split their first atom. The dormitory's illumination shifted from standard white to the cobalt blue that signaled imminent academic activity. Commander Pulox's voice resonated through the neural interface all cadets maintained. All 3rd cycle cadets report to Lecture Hall Epsilon for special tactical briefing. Immediate compliance expected. Zoran reluctantly pulled himself off the bunk, his 3 legs finding purchase on the polished floor. Here we go. Another thrilling expedition into the savage tactics of beings who haven't figured out gravity manipulation. The 3 cadets joined the stream of diverse forms flowing through the station's arterial corridors. Some slithered, others floated, many walked on varying numbers of appendages. All wore the distinctive indigo uniforms of the Galactic Military Academy, the pride of the Confederacy's education system. Lecture Hall Epsilon could accommodate 500 cadets comfortably. Its tiered seating adjusted automatically to each species' physiological requirements. As Zoran settled into his position between Talia and Vex, he noticed an unusual tension in the atmosphere. Commander Pulox stood at the central podium, his segmented exoskeleton gleaming under the spotlights, compound eyes scanning the assembling cadets with uncharacteristic intensity. "Unusual," Talia whispered, her voice barely audible. "The commander has engaged the hall's psionic dampeners." Vex's scales rippled. "And there are security drones at each exit. Whatever this is, it's not standard curriculum." Commander Pulox raised 2 of his 4 upper limbs, a gesture that immediately silenced the murmuring cadets. His voice, augmented by the hall's acoustics, filled the space with commanding precision. Cadets. Today begins a three-part lecture series on pre-FTL warfare tactics from 5 representative planetary civilizations. This analysis is crucial for understanding the developmental patterns of species approaching Confederacy contact protocols. A holographic display materialized above the podium, showing 5 planetary systems rotating slowly. 4 were familiar to most cadets, standard case studies. The 5th, a blue-green world with a single large moon, caused a ripple of surprise. Earth, Pulox announced, his mandibles clicking for emphasis. A planet many of you have dismissed as primitive and tactically irrelevant. The commander's compound eyes swept across the assembled cadets. This perception is not merely incorrect, it is dangerous. Today's lecture will focus exclusively on Earth's warfare evolution, spanning their 19th through 21st centuries by their calendar. I must emphasize that all material presented is classified under Confederacy Protocol 773 Alpha. Dissemination outside this academic context is punishable by neural reprogramming. The hall grew utterly silent. Neural reprogramming was rarely mentioned as a disciplinary measure at the Academy. Before we begin, Pulox continued, I must clarify that Earth remains quarantined. No Confederate vessels are authorized within their heliosphere without direct military council approval. Their designation as high caution is not bureaucratic error. It is considered the minimum appropriate classification by our Tactical Assessment Division. Zoran exchanged glances with Talia, whose 4 eyes had widened considerably. Vex's metallic scales had flattened against their body, a sign of increased attention among Sarkorians. I will now present unaltered historical footage recovered by long-range observation drones and archaeological data extraction, Pulox said, his tone grave. Brace yourselves, cadets. What you are about to witness may challenge your fundamental understanding of sapient conflict. The lights dimmed. The holographic display expanded, enveloping the entire hall in a 3-dimensional projection. Suddenly, the cadets found themselves hovering above a muddy field. The scene below was incomprehensible at first. Long, winding ditches carved into the earth, filled with creatures in drab uniforms. This, Pulox narrated, is what humans called trench warfare, a tactical approach from their First World War. Note the primitive projectile weapons, the absence of energy shields, the rudimentary air support. The perspective shifted, dropping the cadets directly into one of the trenches. The immediacy was shocking. They could see the gaunt faces of human soldiers, eyes hollow with exhaustion, bodies caked with mud. Then came the sound, a distant whistling that grew rapidly louder. Incoming artillery, Pulox explained clinically. The explosion ripped through the trench, sending bodies and earth skyward in a horrific display. Cadets flinched collectively. The scene continued, showing soldiers scrambling over barriers into a hail of machine gun fire, falling by the dozens, yet more climbing over their fallen comrades to continue the advance. Observe, Pulox said, his voice cutting through the gasps of the cadets. Despite catastrophic casualty rates exceeding 70% in some engagements, the attacking forces maintained offensive operations. The footage shifted again. A close-up of a human soldier's face appeared, eyes wide, jaw trembling uncontrollably, limbs spasming. Shell shock, Pulox explained. Neurological damage from proximity to repeated explosions. Yet note, these damaged units were often returned to combat after minimal recovery periods. For nearly an hour, the footage continued, documenting the horrors of Earth's First World War. When it finally faded, leaving the hall in momentary darkness, Zoran realized he had been holding his breath, an instinctive response his species exhibited only under extreme stress. That was merely their beginning, Pulox announced, his voice somehow colder than before. We now move forward approximately 2 solar decades to their Second World War. The new projection materialized, showing aerial views of vast armored columns advancing across landscapes, mechanized vehicles crushing all in their path. The scale had expanded exponentially, no longer isolated trenches, but entire continents consumed by organized violence. "Note the tactical evolution," Pulox commented. "Massed armor, coordinated air support, amphibious landings on unprecedented scale." The footage showed cities under bombardment, structures collapsing, fires raging unchecked. Then came images that caused many cadets to emit involuntary sounds of distress. Mass graves, emaciated prisoners, systematic execution facilities. Humans refer to this as genocide, Pulox explained dispassionately. The systematic elimination of targeted genetic or cultural subgroups. This particular instance resulted in approximately 6 million deaths, all members of the same ethnic classification. Pelora, a six-limbed tactical track cadet sitting several rows ahead, raised a trembling appendage. "Commander, what possible strategic advantage could such an action provide? The resource expenditure alone." "An astute observation, Cadet," Pulox interrupted. "There was no tactical advantage. This was ideologically motivated elimination, a concept many Confederate species find incomprehensible." The images continued to flow. Naval vessels exploding in harbors, aircraft dropping payloads on civilian population centers, armies clashing across multiple continents simultaneously. Then came footage that caused the entire hall to fall into shocked silence. A blinding flash, a rising cloud in the distinctive shape that every military cadet recognized regardless of species. Atomic weaponry deployed against a civilian population center. "Hiroshima," Pulox stated flatly. "The first use of nuclear weapons against inhabited targets. Note that humans developed this technology and immediately deployed it against their own species." Talia's data capture tendril had gone completely still, a sign of profound shock among her kind. Vex's metallic scales had darkened to a deep copper hue, indicating severe emotional distress. Zoran found his three legs locked in rigid posture, his body's instinctive preparation for imminent threat. "This concludes the first segment," Pulox announced. "We will take a brief recess before examining their Cold War period and subsequent conflicts." The lights gradually brightened. No cadet moved. The silence in the hall was absolute, broken only when Vex finally spoke, their voice uncharacteristically subdued. "Commander, with respect, why is this relevant to our tactical training? Humans remain planet-bound. Their technology is centuries behind Confederate standards. These historical atrocities, while disturbing, hardly constitute a high-caution threat classification." Commander Pulox's compound eyes fixed on Vex. "An excellent question, Cadet. One that the second part of our presentation will address directly." The lights dimmed again. This time, the holographic display showed a different type of simulation. Battle projections with Confederate forces engaging human military units. The simulations cycled rapidly, showing dozens of different engagement scenarios. "These are strategic projections created by our most advanced tactical AIs," Pulox explained. "They represent thousands of simulated encounters between Confederate standard forces and human military units at their current technological level." The projections continued to flow, scenario after scenario. Zoran leaned forward, his analytical training engaging despite his disgust. Something was wrong with these simulations. In scenario after scenario, the technologically superior Confederate forces appeared to be losing. "Impossible," Talia whispered, her four eyes blinking rapidly in confusion. Commander Pulox's mandibles clicked sharply. "What you are witnessing, Cadets, is the reason for Earth's high caution designation. Despite technological inferiority, human combat units achieve tactical success against Confederate forces in approximately 98.2% of simulated encounters." A wave of disbelief swept through the hall. Pelora stood up, all 6 limbs rigid with indignation. "Commander, these simulations must be flawed. Our energy shielding alone would render their projectile weapons useless. Our tactical AIs would predict and counter any strategy their primitive command structure could devise." "Your reasoning is sound, Cadet," Pulox acknowledged, "yet incomplete. Observe more closely." The simulation slowed, focusing on specific engagement details. Confederate ships deploying standard defensive protocols, suddenly crippled by primitive nuclear detonations at unexpected ranges. Landing parties ambushed by human forces, using their own environment as camouflage. Supply lines disrupted by guerrilla tactics. "Humans," Pulox continued, "exhibit several warfare characteristics that our tactical doctrines struggle to counter. First, adaptability. They repurpose technologies and tactics with unprecedented speed. Second, asymmetric approaches. They routinely sacrifice conventional advantages to exploit unexpected vulnerabilities. Third, and perhaps most concerning, psychological factors. The display shifted to show human soldiers in various combat situations, charging into certain death, remaining at posts under overwhelming fire, sacrificing themselves to protect others. Human units regularly execute what our tactical AIs classify as suicidal operations, actions that no rational Confederate combatant would consider, as the survival probability approaches zero. Yet these irrational actions frequently succeed precisely because our defensive algorithms cannot predict them. Zorin felt a cold sensation spreading through his 3-chambered heart. The implications were staggering. Confederate military doctrine was built on rational risk assessment, predictive modeling, and technological superiority. If humans routinely operated outside these parameters— "The final factor," Pulox said, his voice somehow even more serious, "is escalation threshold. Confederate doctrine establishes clear parameters for conflict escalation to prevent unnecessary resource expenditure. Humans have repeatedly demonstrated willingness to escalate beyond rational limits, accepting catastrophic losses to achieve objectives that rational analysis would abandon." The lights gradually returned to their normal brightness. Commander Pulox surveyed the silent cadets, his compound eyes unreadable. "This concludes today's presentation. Tomorrow's session will examine specific tactical countermeasures developed for potential human engagement scenarios." Dismissed. As the cadets filed out in stunned silence, Zorin noticed something unprecedented. The usual post-lecture discussions were absent. No debates about tactical applications. No challenges to the instructor's assessments. Just silence, punctuated by the occasional sound of species-specific stress vocalizations. Back in their dormitory pod, Zorin, Talia, and Vex sat in uncharacteristic silence. Finally, Vex spoke, their metallic scales still darkened with distress. "They used atomic weapons on their own planet, their own species." Talia's data capture tendril extended and retracted nervously. "The genocide footage. The systematic elimination of millions based on arbitrary genetic markers. It defies rational analysis." Zorin paced on his 3 legs, a habit that helped him process complex information. "The simulations are what disturb me most. How can a species with such primitive technology consistently defeat our advanced systems?" "Because our systems are designed for rational opponents," Talia said quietly. "Humans appear to operate outside predictable parameters." A soft chime sounded throughout the dormitory level, the administrative notification system. A neutral voice announced, "Attention all cadets. The administrative office will remain open through 3rd shift to process any transfer or resignation requests. By special dispensation of the Academic Council, no explanatory documentation will be required for submissions within the next 12 hours. The 3 cadets exchanged glances. The implication was clear. The Academy was expecting requests after today's presentation. "They're giving us a way out," Vex said, their voice uncharacteristically hollow. Anyone who doesn't want to continue tactical training for potential human engagement scenarios can transfer to non-combat tracks. Zoran felt a momentary surge of relief at the possibility, followed immediately by shame. He had trained for 3 cycles to qualify for the combat track. His home colony had celebrated his acceptance to the academy. Could he really abandon that path because of one disturbing presentation? "I'm going to request a transfer to xenobiology," announced Pelora, appearing suddenly at their dormitory entrance. Her usually confident posture was noticeably diminished, her secondary limbs tucked close to her body in a defensive posture. "What we saw today, I can't. I won't train to engage with such a species." Throughout the night, Zoran observed a steady stream of cadets making their way to the administrative office. Some moved with decisive purpose, others with hesitant steps, but the flow remained constant. By morning cycle, rumors circulated that nearly 20% of the combat track cadets had submitted transfer or resignation requests. When the cadets assembled for the second day of presentations, the hall was noticeably less populated. Commander Pulox surveyed the diminished audience, his compound eyes revealing nothing of his thoughts. "Before we begin today's tactical analysis," Pulox announced, "I must inform you that we have a special presentation from Admiral Krav Tez, Supreme Commander of Confederate Intelligence Division." A ripple of surprise moved through the remaining cadets. The appearance of such a high-ranking officer was unprecedented in routine academic settings. The lights dimmed, and a tall figure materialized on the podium beside Pulox. Admiral Krav's species was one rarely seen at the Academy, his elongated form draped in the distinctive obsidian uniform of Intelligence Division. His face dominated by a complex arrangement of multifaceted eyes that seemed to observe the entire hall simultaneously. "Cadets," the Admiral's voice resonated with harmonic undertones that suggested advanced vocal modifications. "What you witnessed yesterday represents a selective presentation of human warfare capabilities. This was by design." The Admiral's multifaceted eyes swept across the audience. "Commander Pulox has successfully identified those among you who react to threat stimuli with avoidance responses. Those who have transferred or resigned have self-selected out of critical first contact protocols. This was the intended outcome." Zoran felt a surge of confusion, followed by a creeping sense of manipulation. Had yesterday's presentation been a test? "Today," Admiral Krav continued, "the remaining cadets will receive classified information regarding human civilization that has been withheld from general Confederate knowledge banks. This information is restricted under Protocol 9 Alpha, the highest security classification in Confederate military structure." The holographic display activated again, but instead of warfare footage, it showed different scenes. Humans forming chains to rescue others from burning buildings, medical personnel treating wounded enemies, enormous crowds gathered peacefully despite armed opposition. "Humans," the Admiral explained, "possess a psychological characteristic that our xenopsychologists classify as moral courage, the willingness to endure personal harm to uphold abstract ethical principles. This manifestation is not isolated to combat scenarios but permeates their entire civilization." The footage continued, showing humans standing unarmed before military vehicles, forming protective circles around vulnerable members of their species, rebuilding communities after natural disasters. While Commander Pulox correctly identified humans' capacity for violence and irrational combat tactics, he intentionally omitted their equal capacity for self-sacrifice, cooperation, and what they term compassion, an emotional drive to alleviate suffering in others, even at personal cost. The Admiral's multifaceted eyes seemed to focus on each cadet individually, despite addressing the entire hall. The true reason for Earth's high caution designation is not their warfare capability, but their ideological contagion potential. New footage appeared, humans creating art, music, literature, massive peaceful protests toppling authoritarian regimes, celebrations as oppressive systems collapsed. Humans fight with ideas as readily as with weapons. Admiral Krav explained. Concepts like liberty, equality, justice, and human rights have repeatedly demonstrated the capacity to overturn established power structures on their planet. These abstract principles appear to override self-preservation instincts in statistically significant population percentages. The Admiral moved closer to the edge of the podium, his voice lowering slightly, as if sharing a secret. Confederate sociological analysis indicates a 78.3% probability that unrestricted exposure to human ideological frameworks would destabilize our governance structures within 3 standard generations. The implications hit Zoran like a physical blow. The Confederacy had maintained interstellar stability for over 10,000 years through careful hierarchical order, species, planets, and individuals all assigned their proper place in a vast, complex system. The idea that abstract principles could disrupt such an established order seemed inconceivable. Yet the Admiral's presentation suggested exactly that. In simple terms, the Admiral continued, humans have repeatedly demonstrated willingness to die for ideas. More concerning, they have shown the ability to inspire others to do the same. No quarantine of physical weapons can contain the spread of ideology. This is the true reason Earth remains isolated from Confederate contact. New simulations appeared, showing not military engagements but cultural diffusion patterns, the spread of human concepts through Confederate societies, cascading effects on governance structures, probability cones of revolutionary activities expanding across star systems. The secondary reason for yesterday's presentation, Admiral Krav said, was to identify cadets with the psychological resilience to process both aspects of human nature, their capacity for both extreme violence and profound altruism. Those of you who remain will form the core of a specialized diplomatic and military cadre, tasked with managing humanity's eventual integration into the galactic community. The Admiral's multifaceted eyes swept across the hall once more. Earth's quarantine status will not remain viable indefinitely. Technological development projections indicate they will achieve independent FTL capability within 50 to 70 years. The Confederacy must be prepared for that eventuality. With that pronouncement, the Admiral stepped back, and the holographic display deactivated. The lights returned to normal brightness, revealing the stunned faces of the remaining cadets. This concludes our special presentation, Commander Pulox announced. Regular tactical training will resume tomorrow. Any cadet wishing to transfer out of the combat track may still do so within the next 24 hours, without penalty. Dismissed. As the cadets filed out, Zoran noticed a profound difference from yesterday. The silence remained, but it was no longer born of horror or disgust. Instead, it carried the weight of revelation, a fundamental shift in understanding that would require significant processing. Back in their dormitory pod, Zoran found Talia already engaged in rapid research, her neural interface displaying countless human cultural artifacts, art, literature, music, philosophical treatises. Fascinating, she murmured, all 4 eyes wide with intellectual excitement. Their philosophical evolution contains recurring patterns of ethical advancement despite technological limitations. They conceptualized universal rights while still burning combustible materials for energy. Vex sat cross-legged on their bunk, scales shifted to a contemplative copper green. I've accessed the partial xenopsychology profile. Humans appear hardwired for both tribal violence and cross-tribal empathy, a paradoxical combination that defies standard evolutionary models. Zoran settled onto his adaptive resting platform, 3 legs folded beneath him. What Admiral Krav described, ideas powerful enough to disrupt established systems. It challenges everything we've been taught about galactic stability. The Confederacy fears them, Talia said simply. Not their weapons, but their ideologies. Concepts like freedom and self-determination could undermine 10,000 years of hierarchical order. Would that be entirely negative? Vex asked, their metallic voice unusually thoughtful. The current system has maintained peace. But at what cost? Most species accept their designated role without question. Humans appear to constantly question authority. Perhaps there's value in that approach. A soft chime interrupted their discussion. Another administrative announcement. The neutral voice stated, "Attention all cadets. By order of Admiral Krav Tez, the restricted human cultural database has been made available to all remaining combat track cadets. Access requires standard biometric authentication. Academic credit will be granted for comparative analysis of human ethical frameworks and Confederate governance principles." The three cadets exchanged glances. The implication was clear. They were being encouraged to study humanity's ideological systems, not just their warfare tactics. "I'm staying in the combat track," Zoran announced, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "Not because I want to fight humans, but because I want to understand them." Talia's data capture tendril extended fully, a sign of strong agreement among her species. Their philosophical evolution, despite their violent tendencies, it merits comprehensive study. Vex's scales shifted to a brighter hue, indicating renewed enthusiasm. Their art alone contains patterns I've never encountered in Confederate cultural archives, and their music, utilizing deliberate dissonance to create emotional responses. It's unlike anything in our aesthetic frameworks. Pelora appeared in their doorway again, her posture noticeably different from the previous night, more resolute. Her secondary limbs extended in a confident stance. "I've withdrawn my transfer request," she announced. "After seeing the Admiral's presentation, I need to figure out these humans. They make no sense by Confederate standards, yet they've built a civilization capable of both horror and beauty." Throughout the academy, similar conversations were occurring in dormitory pods, dining halls, and recreational areas. The atmosphere had transformed from one of dread to one of intense curiosity. Cadets, who had been on the verge of transferring, reconsidered their decisions. Those who had already submitted requests rushed to withdraw them. In the following days, the Academy's curriculum underwent a subtle but significant shift. Combat tactics remained central, but they were now supplemented with extensive study of human cultural evolution, ethical frameworks, and socio-political systems. Cadets found themselves analyzing not just military engagements, but literature, art, and philosophical treatises from Earth's diverse cultures. 1 month later, Zoran stood with Talia and Vex in the observation dome, gazing out at the stars. Somewhere out there, a small, blue-green planet continued its orbit, its inhabitants unaware that they were being studied with such intensity by beings from across the galaxy. "The Admiral visited again today," Talia said quietly. "I overheard him telling Commander Pulox that first contact protocols are being revised. The quarantine may be lifted within the next decade." Vex's scales rippled with excitement. Imagine the cultural exchange possibilities. Their art, their music, their philosophical frameworks, all evolving in isolation from Confederate influence. "And their weapons," Zoran added soberly. "Their capacity for violence. We can't ignore that aspect of their nature." "True," Talia acknowledged, her 4 eyes blinking in sequence. But the Admiral's presentation suggested something profound, that humans' greatest weapon isn't their nuclear arsenals or their unconventional tactics. It's their ideas, their principles, their willingness to stand for abstract concepts like justice and freedom. Zoran contemplated this, his 3 legs shifting into a more stable configuration. Perhaps that's the most important lesson from all of this. Confederate stability is built on order, hierarchy, and predictability. Human progress seems driven by constant questioning, challenge, and change. A dangerous approach, Vex noted, but also compelling. There's something admirable about a species willing to risk everything for intangible ideals. As they stood together, watching the stars, Zoran felt a profound shift in his understanding of not just humanity, but of the Confederacy itself. The stable, ordered system he had always accepted without question suddenly seemed less absolute, more open to evolution. "I wonder," he said softly, "if the true outcome of first contact might not be humans joining our existing structures, but rather us adapting to accommodate their perspectives." Talia's data capture tendril extended thoughtfully. "A mutual evolution, their dynamism tempered by our stability, our order enriched by their creativity." "Either way," Vex concluded, metallic scales shifting to a hopeful gold, "the galaxy will never be quite the same once humanity fully joins the interstellar community." In his private chambers, Admiral Krav reviewed the latest reports from the Academy with satisfaction. The experiment had succeeded beyond expectations. By presenting the dual nature of humanity, both their capacity for extreme violence and their equally powerful drive toward compassion and justice, he had identified a cadre of cadets capable of nuanced understanding. These young officers would form the vanguard of a new approach to human integration, not containment or control, but genuine engagement and exchange. The risk remained significant. Human ideologies could indeed disrupt Confederate stability. Yet the potential benefits of cultural cross-pollination could not be ignored. The quarantine around Earth would be lifted gradually, carefully. The first diplomatic missions would include cadets from this very class, beings who understood the paradoxical nature of humanity and respected both their destructive capacity and their moral courage. As he closed the final report, Admiral Krav allowed himself a moment of reflection. After 10,000 years of careful order, the Confederacy faced perhaps its greatest challenge. Not a military threat, but an ideological one. A species whose strength lay not in advanced technology, but in the power of their convictions. Their willingness to stand for principles even at great personal cost. Such a species could destroy everything the Confederacy had built, or help transform it into something greater. The difference would depend largely on how they were approached, understood, and integrated. The Admiral's multifaceted eyes turned toward the window, focusing on a distant point of light. Sol, the unremarkable yellow star around which orbited a remarkably dangerous and promising world. "Welcome to the galaxy, humans," he murmured. "May we all survive the introduction." In dormitories throughout the Academy, cadets immersed themselves in human culture, history, and philosophy. They debated the merits of democracy versus hierarchical governance, analyzed the evolution of human ethical frameworks, and studied the complex interplay between human violence and compassion. These cadets would one day stand at the forefront of a new era. Officers trained not just in combat tactics, but in cross-cultural understanding. They would face the challenge of integrating a species that defied conventional Confederate categories, whose greatest strength lay not in technology, but in the power of their ideas. As night fell on orbital station ZT-9, the lights in the library remained on, illuminating the faces of dozens of cadets bent over texts and holographic displays, all studying the paradoxical species from the third planet of an unremarkable star. In their hands lay the future of interstellar relations, and perhaps the evolution of the Confederacy itself. The day alien cadets watched Earth's war footage had begun as a tactical exercise. It ended as the first step toward a transformation that would ripple across the galaxy for generations to come.